those issues. So we're live. Welcome everybody who's joining us. There's a follow-up from my meeting from last Monday where I was talking about the proposed attribute binding syntaxes. I actually went and set off writing them, and while doing that, I realized that what I had proposed, pretty much nothing could actually be done. It wasn't so much like technical reasons. It was that certain attributes and keys were already pretty much reserved words by MustAction and handlebars, so I had to change a lot of things around, which sucked. But and I kind of talk through the plans, what I have to make hopefully things a little bit more regular by 3.0. So again, there's two issues. One is, I guess I'll show on the screen now. One is 1700. And while I'm getting this set up to share, a big thanks to everybody who is here. This feedback is really helpful. Because this is really hopefully going to be one of the last times we have to change syntaxes around. I always say that, but hopefully this time it's true. So let's start with the binding syntaxes, and then we'll talk about the operator syntaxes. So let's talk about, I'm just going to open up an example page here, and I'll just kind of run through them myself because I think it's more easily understood. If you have a component and you want to two-way bind its child property in the ViewModel to something else in the parent scope, you'll now, the proposal is you will do it like this. So if parent property, maybe I should call it parent prop and child prop just to see how the hyphenation works. So let's say I had a parent component that had a full name property, and I want to pass that to child component. I would write full name like this. Yeah, if I wanted in the template, I would write, obviously full name like this. So essentially, we're moving the curly braces from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. I can talk about why to do that, but let me get through the full proposal first, and then we'll talk about kind of like why I came to this. So if you wanted to, we also talk about reference to scope, and I really wanted, originally reference to scope were going to be these pounds, but we can't use pound because, well, it's a long explanation, but a lot of it has to do with we can't use pounds here. So to save something to reference, I really wanted it to actually be ampersand, and we can't use ampersand because we can't use ampersand here. So, because that is a reference. So now we're going to use star, and I think this is going to be a temporary use until 3.0, because what I'd like to do is make, I think for 2.2 we'll deprecate the ampersand meaning escape in handlebars, and we'll say you just have to use, going forward for 3.0, you'll only have the triple option, and then that will allow us to then say ampersand is actually references scope, which I think makes the most sense. If you are wondering what the hell references scope are, you're not alone. References scope is you can almost think of it as a local variable to this template. So if I wanted to, let's say I had one component that allows me to edit driver's license or lists drivers. So I could have a list of drivers, and whatever driver is selected would be its selected property. And what I wanted to do is export that to the template. I could say selected driver. That way, if I had a license plate editing component, I could, and it needed a plate name which was on the selected driver, I could, I need this like this, do two-way bindings. I would say plate name is equal to selected driver dot plate name. With ampersand and then stuff. So this is the references scope. Selected driver would be available in this template, but would really be local to the template. You wouldn't. It's just a local variable in the template, if you will.
I always thought that explaining it as the same way you declare a variable in a function in JavaScript is probably the best analogy, right? Like if you declare a variable in a function, it's available to that entire scope.
Yes,
function, so.
That's exactly. And there is, like JavaScript, where JavaScript variables have no block level scope. The same is true of reference variables in templates. So if this was inside of an each, each class or something, there's a bunch of classes. I don't know, and it was going. There's no selected driver is global to the whole template, so there's not like a local version of selected driver for just with subsection. It's global to the whole template. I would love to make a local version of it, but it's tricky and hard and would be, well, it's not hard, it's just a little expensive because we'd have to have an additional scope anytime a section happened, which is just not something that I really want to add right now. I don't think it's needed. We can add that later, just like JavaScript did, if it becomes important enough to people.
When you say it's local to the template, is it being added to the ViewModel?
No. No.
Is there any pros, cons to just having this as a single property on the ViewModel versus not?
You can pass it into the ViewModel.
The idea was a lot of times you don't want, like, let's say I have if you wanted a ViewModel, then just get rid of it, right? This will look for a selected driver element on the parent ViewModel.
No, I understand that, but why would you want one or the other, I guess?
Okay, so the big reason is, let's say like you had leak scope turned on. Or you weren't leaking scope, right? So these now don't exist. If foo had leak scope false, these actually reference selected driver wouldn't be anymore, right? It would be whatever other parent, whatever template we're in, it would be the view model of that. Now you might not want selected driver to really even be part. Maybe this is just components setting up communication between these two things. Do you really want to manage a selected driver property and have it be set on your view model? No, you just want an easy way to set up kind of communication between two subcomponents. This is that way. That's what it's for. So yeah, you can always add the property of the view model, but sometimes you don't want to have to do that. This was really common in, like, I was making so many example apps all the time where I'd have to have always like a little app component. It drove me crazy. That would have to have a selected driver property. You don't have to do that anymore. So it's for convenience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay. So that's the references scope, and this is two-way binding. Now, to one-way bind, let's back to the full name example. And this would be, well, let's keep this actually, but let's say we're just doing selected driver, and this is in the parent view model, and we're connecting everything. So notice here that drivers, for the most part, should go from this element to selected driver, right? Especially if it was a reference to scope, right? We don't want anything else to be, like, we don't want, if selected driver changes, to actually update the driver's component selected property. right? We want this as really the originator and who has kind of full control over what selected driver looks like. To do that, to do one-way binding from child property to parent property, the proposal is this. So this would set up a one-way binding on driver selected and update selected driver, either the parent scope property or the references property. Okay, and then now let's say I only wanted this to select a driver plate name. Well, this actually you do want two-way binding because it's editing the plate, so you do need two-way binding. But let's say for some reason it was like show plate. So no, it should not be updating the plate name. The proposal is do it like this. So basically here you can see kind of the direction of your curly brace kind of forms something that looks a little bit like an arrow, especially in this case, that shows you which way the binding is taking place if you have one-way binding. Okay. Any comments, concerns, questions about this?
I wish you didn't. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. You first.
No, I mean, I just had a stupid comment, so you go.
Okay. My question is, why do we have these curly braces and the equal sign? Why do we not have the round brackets and it's more than your proposal? Your first proposal is this is a yeah. Maybe if we change to 3.0, there is a difference between these types. Do you understand what I mean?
Sorry. I'm sorry, I did not understand what you mean.
In your example, you have this curly brace and the equal sign, and this is for 2.3, I think. And in 3.0, it will change to your first proposal for.
No, sorry. This would stay. We would not be changing to the first proposal. This is what would be permanent.
So okay. So in your issue 700, your first proposal is not going to 3.0.
Are we losing Julian or are we losing me?
No, I ask you.
No, I mean my internet. I think is cutting now. Is it my
Okay.
internet or is it Julian's internet right now?
Probably yours, because
Probably mine, because mine always does.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second, Julian. Sorry for pausing you. I'm just gonna connect to a different. Try to connect to a different internet real quick. If I can. Why is it not giving me the option here?
Julian, I think what you're asking is the previous proposal from last week, is that intended for 3.0 and is this current one intended for 2.3? Was that your question?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Thank you.
Their proposals, yeah, their two proposals they're both meant for 2.3. They're not. Neither one breaks compatibility. The new one solves the problem that the other one did not solve.
And which one?
The new proposal. So the one that you're seeing on his screen, that's the one from last week, right?
Yeah.
That did not solve one issue, which I don't think he talked about. When he's back, I'll ask him to explain that, because I kind of remember that kind of thing.
But we are not going to, if we accept this given proposal, we're throwing out the previous one that we talked about last week, correct? That
Right,
would be,
yeah. It's a replacement. Yeah.
And why do we change this proposal?
Oh, he'll probably explain it better than me. It has to do with the previous proposal doesn't reflect direction, whereas the new one does.
Okay.
He'll explain. Sure, much better than me.
But I think we talk about the AngularJS. Maybe it's the first proposal is more like AngularJS, and the second one is maybe not.
Like visually, yes, but the second one still, I think it still solves all the same scenarios. I mean, I can try to explain. Let me see if I can pull it up. Do you remember what issue that is?
700?
Maybe? 1700? Yeah, okay, so the problem, so yeah, if you look at 1700.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so Julian's basically, people are wondering, what is the new syntax solve? So it's the direction case. Can you explain that?
Yeah, exactly. So there is a need to do from child to parent only directional binding, right? So we need a way to go from child to parent. So can everybody hear me still?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so the old one for two-way binding, you would do, for one-way binding, you would do something like selected equals selected driver, but this would only go from parent to child, right? There was no way to just say from child to parent, which we definitely need mostly for, well, I think the primary use case is to go to reference and scope, although like Alexis and Matthew has been a proponent of, there's sometimes a desire for it to go to the view model. So you could go from child element to the one directional to the parent view model. So this is something that's desired, but what would the syntax be? Because we're kind of running out of other things. So if this is still how you would do click, which that hasn't really changed, you want to call some method. We have that. And this is one directional, and two directional would be this. What would one directional be? Matthew proposed one directional from child to parent would look like this, which makes sense. It would say basically already make use of the inverse operator, which is helpful. And I wish I had my whole breakdown of the pluses and minuses still, Matthew, that we made together. So there's...
Yeah, I don't have that either.
Yeah, Matthew and I kind of talked through it, like the different proposals. So here's essentially the other proposal, which is div selected. This is child to parent. Sorry, parent to child. Child to parent, and then two-way binding. Looks like this. So if anybody has other ideas or has them in the next, like, within the week. But let me go through real quick what I see as the pluses and minuses to frame the discussion. So this is, let's talk about some of the negatives of this. The negatives of this is it's kind of weird because it's not symmetrical, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of different.
I think that's the
Positive
biggest thing.
huh?
So I think that's probably the biggest thing, lack of symmetry.
Lack of symmetry. The positive is I think this is actually much clearer what it's the direction if you were just to look at it necessarily than this. Like I think it's, to me, I very much easily read this is going from this side to this side and this is going from here to here because the natural arrowing kind of lines that up. I don't know what Marshall's saying.
Well, he's asking why is the closing curly brace in line 10 not on the left side of selected?
That's something that Matthew suggested, is that we could also do it this way, which I'm fine with if people prefer that. I don't know, I just like kind of looking here to see my arrows, but if it was over here, that can be made to work as well.
I think actually the biggest negative that I saw with this one was, I don't remember how I said it, but it's like you're forced to understand all of the syntaxes to understand the most common cases. Like you have to get it all. You know what I mean? Like whereas the others, like, well, you can kind of ignore. You can ignore the inverse until you actually need it.
Yeah.
But maybe once you get this one, it's a little bit easier to understand because of the arrows.
Yeah, to me, something like this is, once you understand it a little bit, you've seen it, then you'll never really forget it. And it's more obvious, I think, looking at it than what this would do. I don't know what you guys think.
I definitely think that that currently what you have on screen for 10 and 11 is better than putting the curly brace next to the equals on line 10. Just from an aesthetic standpoint of view, that's the way I didn't ask that earlier because I was waiting to see if that was going to be used in some other way. But I definitely like the way 10, 11, and 12 work better than when you had the curly brace on the other side on 10, closer to the equal sign. I don't know why. It's just a subjective thing.
Yeah, no, I can see that pretty easily myself. So here's the comparison of like the two kind of lined up next to each other. One other advantage that I do like is that although this is, to kind of put the term that Matthew and I were using earlier, there's kind of like a hidden genius to this, which was kind of cool, but I don't think worth it. That it's kind of like this weird, okay, it's a click binding, but it's also a one-way binding. Those kind of combine to do two-way binding. That's very cool, but I wasn't sure if it was worth it. And then I really like the fact that what we're telling people to do is move your curly braces, which were over here, which is the only binding we currently support, to just saying, well, now move them on the left.
So there was I don't know if you saw the comment in Gitter, to move in line 9, the left curly brace to the, what was it? Can you pull up the Gitter chat?
Me?
Maybe? That's probably easier. So there was another proposal here.
Justin? Yeah. I mean,
because then you can keep them both on the same side, I guess.
Let me steal that so we can. Put that in here.
So the idea is that for two-way?
Yeah.
All right.
I kind of find it confusing using the mustaches for a different purpose than sort of what it already is, which is like replacing this with something dynamic. You know, by wrapping it, you're saying, I'm going to replace this content with something else, and now you've kind of used the little mustaches, and admittedly you're only using one side of them, but it's a weird sort of confusion that you're using that mustaches now. If you only use one of them instead of wrapping something in it, it means something different now. I find that a little odd, and
Yeah.
I don't know, it rubs me the wrong way.
Me too.
Square brackets?
That's a good point.
We could do square brackets.
I much prefer square brackets person.
Can you update the line 18 proposal with square brackets? I'm just curious how that would look like.
I hate the way line 18 proposal.
Different strokes for different folks. What I really should do is, like, when we're done with this, is sample like a bunch of people who weren't through this conversation and just be like, what do you think this does?
Yeah.
And okay, if they have no freaking clue, I'll be like, some of these one-way bind, some of these two-way bind, and go from child to parent. Which ones do you think do which? And like get a stopwatch and see how fast they can identify it.
That's tough. Line 21 looks like some kind of a list syntax now.
I was thinking the same thing. Unless you drop the equals operator completely and just put the selected driver in.
Oh, well,
in
yeah.
the brackets.
There was one thing that I was thinking about, which we might want to reserve the index operator, just because it would allow for weird things that we could allow people to do and say, well, we're going to read selected from the scope, and whatever property that is, that's what we want a two-way bind here.
Not to add more confusion to all this, but what if instead of a square bracket, because I do like the square bracket better than the curly due to that thing I was talking about, the confusion, would a colon be a valid option? And maybe you could do a colon on the left-hand side of the equal sign means one thing, and the right-hand side of the equal sign means another thing, or is that completely invalid?
You could, colons would probably be fine. I don't know. To me, then, I don't know if, like, what direction is that to you, and what direction is this to you? I mean, we kind of know from precedent now, but I like the fact that, to me, we're losing something vital if we get away from something that has no sense of direction. If that makes sense. Well, we could use parentheses. We could say, hey, our event binding looks like this, and we could just put colon there for event binding. And then we could do this or this and that kind of thing. Parentheses is on the table, but we need to come up with an event binding syntax if we don't use parentheses.
There's one more option in Gator. Let's throw them all on, and then we'll. You almost need to vote, or actually do what you suggest in asking people.
What is
What do you
this?
think this does?
I don't know what this does. What does this do?
So the only reason is the direction of the binding. Is this right?
Yeah, we need to support different directions with binding.
So why do we not solve this by the equal sign to change this? So I like the syntax from Angular, the first one, very well. It looks common, and I don't like this. Yeah, this one curly braces on the one side and on the other side, and this direction with the equal sign. So why do we change the equal sign to other one?
I don't think we can change the equal sign.
We need an equal sign if we want attributes to actually work.
Okay.
So for the old version, yeah, you would need some type of other declarator to tell when there's a reverse. And in my opinion, it loses its, I don't know. I like brackets, but I would rather. And also another thing, I forgot one mention. This doesn't optimize for what the most common case is, which the most common case is two-way binding. So this would always require 4 extra characters, or 2 extra characters for two-way binding, which isn't, again, bad. It's just you're going to be writing a lot of this, and I think unnecessarily.
Well, I mean, we could use you could use the curlies for two-way and still use
yes, you
for
could then go bracket, inverse bracket with this one.
This is backwards compatible, right? Like, can we use the old syntax still then? Anyway.
Just for two-way.
Just on components. These will work not with components.
It won't work without not okay.
This would you would actually create a view model on this div. This would actually do that. Which might sound like, wait, what the hell is that for? But there's times where you, like on script tags and things like that, with can-view auto-render. There's other things too where, like can import has a view model. There's other things as well that are non-components that do have a view model that we want to interact with, and we're making essentially all the view model binding stuff that was in component can be now moved into bindings and just run everywhere. So other things can kind of opt into the same behavior, which has a lot of advantages.
It'd be so great if you could use greater than and equal than, or greater than and less than. But, yeah.
Yes, if you could use this or this, like if you could use that or something, that would be awesome. Or two-way binding, I don't know.
Is that impossible, or does it just make the parsing really complicated?
Yeah.
It's impossible from a. There's another advantage to all of this in that, like, your MustAction actually becomes live. Like, I could actually now, this is another issue, is I can actually put MustAction here, and I could say, like, if foo, do this, otherwise I want this other property. And as MustAction would change the attribute value for selected, we would actually then could go look in the scope for the bar value. Once you start doing weird things that don't kind of fit in with the DOM, then you lose this ability. It might be possible, but it's going to be really, really weird, I think, if we were to do that. Like, I do, part of this is, like, I do want it so that, let's say our view models were, like, let's say you inserted an element someday inside of another component. Well, I'd want that element to be able to kind of look up the view model. If you just put in raw elements like this, and maybe even be able to find selected driver in some kind of scope object, you would just start walking up, go to that parent element, ask, hey, do you have a scope? If you do, I want selected driver from it. Well, if selected driver was like this, right? Eventually I want to pave the way for this for normal elements just to work, even with view model bindings. So you could never do that. How would you express this or this? You might be able to, but it's going to be really annoying to do it. So that's why you can't just like inner HTML that and expect, I think, most browsers to just work.
Okay.
So, what I'll probably do is ask everybody to kind of vote for theirs, but I want to finish up the other so everybody can kind of take a break from thinking about this, put some distance, and then let's just talk really quickly through the other. You might be able to, but it's going to be really annoying to do it. So that's why. Oh, James, get your man up or expect. Thanks. All right, so what was the other issue? Okay, so let's talk about this one, which was going to be compute and the at operators. So this one I got working. Put this down for later. Essentially what this means is if you have a MustAction helper, you can call it now like this, or you have something in your ViewModel, a function in your ViewModel or in your scope, like in your scope, your ViewModel scope, essentially. If you call it like this and bar is observable, bar will still be passed as a value. So you guys might have done like the register. Well, you might have done something like this. You might have had a ViewModel, and you might have had like something called like print name as a function, or print something. And console log something. And you might have had a name property. I'll just do Justin because I'm unoriginal. If you have ever done something like this with Stache currently, something is going to be a compute, so you need to do this to it. Does that make sense? What you can do now, and it won't be called compute, is call it with parentheses. And that will actually just pass something as the actual value, as a string value, even though it's observable. And if the observable changes, print something will be recalled. If you wanted it to still be past the compute, you have to do this. Now let's say name was an actual can compute for some reason with Justin. Now doing this would actually pass Justin by default. Something would be Justin here. But if you actually wanted to pass the compute, if you actually wanted to pass a compute that would resolve to a compute, you could do at, and essentially this would pass a compute that you would call as a compute. What at does, oh sorry, at would not do that. I'm sorry, at would just pass a compute, but would recall if the name property were to change. It would not recall if this were to change. So let me explain that. So at, you can think of at is what it's always going to do is pass the value that's at the position here. So whatever is at the name property, I'm going to pass that. But I will recall this print something function if the name property here were to change to a different compute or to a different value, we'll recall it. So this is mostly going to be useful for when you want to pass a function. So if I didn't do this, and let's say was a full name property. And that was just in here, and here we were doing this.after full name, returning that. Okay, so if I do this, right now, what's going to happen is it's going to look up name in the scope, see that it's a function, call it, and then essentially turn that into a compute, but get the value out of it and pass something would actually be Justin. If I wanted to pass the name function itself, I would do @name. And then what it will do is it actually just pass the raw function here. But the function proxied or bound to whatever its scope is. So you could actually call something, and that would call ViewModel.name, like you would expect. But no observability would be happening in this case. You would want to pass something to a compute yourself if you wanted suddenly what's going on in here to be observable. If that makes sense. Just think of it as like it passes whatever there. And compute will turn whatever's there into a compute. And without that, it does, I think for the most part, it's going to do what you expect now. It's going to pass the actual value, recall the function if anything's observable behind the scenes, and get the new value out. So one interesting thing, though, with all of this is what happens with each. Because it's kind of a very special helper. Each, you will almost, if you have a list, let's say I had a function here. I had a filter list, or like in to-do MVC. I had something that was like I had all my to-dos, and I had some compute whether to show completed or incomplete. True. And I'm going to return a different list where each to-do matches whatever its completed status, matches whatever show complete looks like. All right, so this filter list will change every time, you know, a to-do is added or removed, or its complete is changed, or this show complete changes. If I do this, like that, that's not good, because essentially each will be recalled anytime filter list changes. So this is the one place, if you're going to call each like this, instead of how we used to call it like this, you actually want this being passed to compute, because each listens to this with filter list changes and does its diffing. You would lose out on the diffing if you don't pass this, if you're going to call functions like this, helpers like this. Hopefully that kind of illustrates the difference. Each is a special helper that really relies upon the computes being passed to achieve a lot of its performance gains. So you would have to still pass the compute. If you are going to be returning something that's going to turn totally different list instances. If instead you were just passing to-dos, but because to-dos is never going to change to a different list, then it's okay to just do this. But I wanted to show you this kind of special case that I found while using this. Any questions about this?
So is it right that if you pass @ that's always going to give you whatever the value is at that value? If you pass the tilde, it's always going to give you a compute, and if you pass nothing, it's going to give you what you probably want, which is usually a value.
With parentheses, yes. Well, think about it as really,
yeah, with parentheses.
@ will pass you a compute still, so like,
if there's a compute, yeah.
It will. Well, it'll still do a compute. Like @ will at works, by the way. It's kind of better if we. I wish I didn't delete that example. Oh, I forgot about this. This was supposed to move down there. Let me go back to the previous example.
When will at pass you compute? Unless the thing you're pointing at is compute. I'm not talking about each. I'm just talking about.
No, I know.
General syntax.
If you use at, like, let's say you do, you can still use at. Okay, so let's say I used a normal helper, print something. Let's say I call it the normal helper syntax, and I did at name. I would still pass a compute to print something. Oh, sorry, not at name. If I did at full name. This is not going to suddenly start passing just the string Justin. It's still going to pass a compute. It's essentially like, because compute almost always passed, like, to normal helpers, right? So all it's doing is saying, like, I want to pass, in this case of normal helpers, it's like, give me a compute for the value specifically at full name. You can also do give me a compute, or if you can make a compute for something at name. In this case, it can't create a compute because if I read, this is on the prototype, and because reading the prototype isn't like observable, it would actually just give you this function. Print something would be called with a function. So think about it, like, it's going to give you what's ever there, but if what's there, if you had to read a compute to get to that value, well, in this case, it's going to pass a compute then. In the normal helper case.
So how would you get the string full name? Like how would you get the?
How would I get this?
No, with full. If you were getting full name at full name, you said at full name is going to give you a compute.
Oh, you wanted the string for something like this? You can't.
Can't. Wait. So, but if you use the call expression, you would get the string, right?
And you get the string. Yep.
So I thought you were trying to. I thought with the two new syntaxes, I thought you were trying to make them the same, but it sounds like that's not the case.
I wanted to what?
I thought with the new syntax, with at and tilde, that they would work the same for.
No, at and tilde. So that's maybe one of the confusing things right now. Is at and tilde are kind of different things. They're different animals. At is okay.
No, I understand they're different, but I thought they would work the same across helpers and in call expressions, but that sounds like that's not the case.
They don't. No, because you think of it as like your helper versus call expression has kind of a, how do I say this? That kind of overrides, like, think about it as this controls like what value. Actually, this only really makes sense in terms of call expressions. Only call expressions actually really benefit from this. Doing this inside of a normal helper is meaningless because it's passing a compute anyways, right? For whatever there. So this is more useful for just for call expressions to say, hey, whatever value you found, well, you're always looking up a compute. So everything underneath the hood, if you do prints, so think of it this way, print something, no matter what, well, the first thing is I need to look up a name value, right? And it's going to try to convert that, or let's do full name for now. I'm going to find full name and make that a compute, right? Then, depending on if you're called with parentheses or not, it gets passed as either a compute or we read the compute's value, right? That's what the parentheses actually kind of controls.
Yeah, I get that, but I understand that's partially for backwards compatibility. But with at is a new symbol, so why would you want to get the compute if you're using at?
Why would you want to get the compute if you're using at? I have no idea. Someone in the issue, I don't know if it was Julian or it was the other guy, mentioned they had a use case in mind for when you might want to have a compute as a property. I don't think that that's very common. I think what is the real driving use case for at symbol is so you can pass a function. So I can say, in both cases, I want to pass a function to print something. Or if I want to pass a callback to a compute, or sorry, a component, I can do that with my favorite syntax. At print something, I can actually pass the print something callback. Print something function, or I can pass the name function as well, and it won't convert this to a compute. It'll just pass the function itself. That's really the driving use case, passing functions for at. But it makes sense for computes as well. If you, for some reason, had a compute as a property value, well, then you can deal with that scenario the same way. So that's why it's there like that. It kind of solves both in case this other one exists. All right, any other questions about this? I think this one's much less controversial. I think it's a little confusing, but I think for the most part, especially if we start using, I think this is the syntax that will really show in guides and kind of going forward, because it cleans up the weirdness that happens now with can.js, where you're always passing computes. I think everybody hates that, and 99% of the time you don't want a compute, you want the stupid value. I think that it'll unify things a lot more. The other cool thing about this now is that you can actually you can pass your components. Like if I wanted to pass print something, for some reason this took whatever the value was. I can do stuff like this now. So foo would, even though you can't really two-way bound. So if I wanted it from here into foo, I could actually pass Mr. through print something in this ViewModel to read the full name, and it would one-way bind to the foo property in my component. So you can actually kind of set things like up. And this might not seem important, but it is so important if you're ever looping, where you want to pass like some index or some item. Like you want to pass like you're going through a list of items and you want to pass each item's you're doing each items, and each item has like you're going through each, what is it really for me, it's like each games, and then for each game it has like players, but I want to do the home team, so I can do like, what was it? It was something like, okay, I want to do player 1 of the game, so games, there's a team, and for each one I want to do like player 1, and then I want to get their stats. Something like that. If it wasn't player 1, I had to do like, I forgot exactly. There's some reason I wanted to call a function here with some index or some other value that I couldn't do, and then I knew this problem solves, and I'm looking forward to making that work in Bitballs. I had to use a helper to do that, to do what I wanted, but now they'll just be able to do it like that. All right. Any other thoughts? Hopefully it's kind of understood why we're adding this and the reasons for it, and hopefully people can see why it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that the call expressions are non-controversial. The binding syntaxes are a little more.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to the binding syntaxes. All right. So what I think I'll do is let's label these. So A, and then we'll call this one A star. that's what you like instead of the two-way binding here. This I think is just B again. Oh, this is the C star.
Is A star instead of the two-way binding syntax, or also?
What's labeled? 1 second. Sorry. Oh, it's 1 second.
It's A plus.
Huh?
A star is A plus, right? Line 5 and 7 will both be possible, correct?
No, I don't think so. I don't want to have two ways to do binding syntaxes. I mean, we can make it possible, but I don't really care about that. Like, don't consider like, oh, we can make it possible. Because there's one guide.
Can you add?
Huh?
Go ahead.
There's one guide, and I want to kind of keep it that way. If that makes sense. So this would be two-way binding, and then these would be one. C star. B. I hate voting on these things. This we call F, but then you've got to provide me another way of doing binding, which this I actually don't mind too bad, but then we need a way to do event binding, so we're kind of in the same pickle.
I just
Okay.
noticed, I don't know if it's worth adding the F. Mark's syntax didn't make it into this list. I thought it was pretty nice.
What was Mark's?
It was a square brace on one side and a parentheses on the other to show direction. So double
that or something.
Double brackets to show two-way, and then
you paste that.
It's in Getter.
My Getter window went. Where is it?
Scroll up a little bit more. There's been a.
I'm saying there's just been just pasted if you're looking at it right now.
Yeah, I just forwarded it. Should be at the bottom now.
Huh?
Somebody pasted it.
That's what you were talking about, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
The event handler syntax will be the same for every case, right?
Presumably, except for F. I'm wary of this because it's like, I mean, I guess I like it, but the problem is
it's not obvious which one is which for direction. You kind of lose the symmetry, but then you don't. I mean, I'm not in love with.
Actually, I actually thought this would have been parent to child because I see the roundedness as pointing to the left. But whatever.
May I suggest one more? Like, not one more, but if you go back to the original one where we have two-way binding, we have with square brackets and round bracket. So basically, there are just two directions. So square bracket can mean one direction, and round bracket can mean another direction. So it seems to me that it's all here. So if we just can separate the event binding with some other symbol, so if we want, let's say, parent to child, so square bracket is parent to child? Yeah, I think it's
parent to child.
Then round bracket could be, parenthesis, could be child to parent. And both together will be bidirectional.
That's like, but we have event binding then too.
Yes, so we can separate event binding with a special symbol, that's all.
But what would that special symbol be then?
Colon or ampersand, or not ampersand. So, sorry, maybe, I think you were proposing the $sign.
But the $sign differentiates between normal event binding and ViewModel event binding. I didn't really even talk about.
Okay, maybe column.
Okay, so to be clear, you're talking about this is one-way binding still from parent to child.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to say, now you're going to make this child to parent.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then this is two-way binding, but then what does event binding?
Event binding is the same as 42, but with a colon in the
It's the same as what? Colon?
Yeah, with a colon after the opening round bracket.
Oh, so we do this?
Something like this, yeah.
I don't know about that. I would rather just do colon then. Right?
But like round brackets. So for one-way bind, it means that it will update the selected driver on line 43. On line 46, event would also update selected or like call selected driver, right? It also will help to make it consistent. So there still is a direction.
Sorry, I'm not following. What?
So the round bracket means that we want to update the thing on the right hand, right?
Yeah.
So the event also wants to update something on the right hand. So I would keep round brackets and just add colon inside. And colon would just tell us that that's event that will cause this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
The problem I see with colon is that might be used in JavaScript for similar kind of things. It might get confusing.
Yeah, and then what would event binding look like? Colon dollar? Like on the element event binding. So I didn't talk through all the others. There's the event binding right now looks like so if I want to listen to click, I do that and I can call foo.
I think it would be the same in Ilias. It would be just parentheses dollar. The colon would denote a non-DOM event.
Okay.
I think, maybe, I don't know.
But then, yeah, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge fan because then it's like we're adding other... It's like, which one of these is one-way parent to child, and which is child to parent?
Yeah, but you will have to learn this one time for any of these syntaxes.
But no, I don't. You could tell me 5 times and I wouldn't remember it. I disagree. I think that either one of these, either doing it like this or like this or whatever, you know and will remember forever. Like, I know, I bet you will know which way is child to parent and parent to child looking at this. But I think it's much less likely for someone to remember. I don't even, like, which one. You might remember because the event binding helps you remember a little bit because you can remember, like, okay, I'm almost always event binding, so this is kind of like an event binding on the child, so this is child to parents. But I don't think it's nearly as memorable as when you have, like, some kind of direction implied with the shape of your...
But I don't think that the memorableness of it outweighs the fact that that looks almost like a mistake. Like both of those, even with the squiggly or the square, it looks like somebody accidentally left something out. It doesn't have the symmetry like you were saying. And so I think I agree with you that the arrows give that memory, like, hey, you won't forget which way is which. But I don't think that outweighs the fact that this is going to feel odd to people always, I think.
Even on option D?
What?
Sorry?
Even on option D, like I think if it's, I think the option D and E, what they bring to the table is that it makes it look like it's part of the equal sign. So it makes it look like it's an operator. I agree with your point
I especially
Yeah.
don't think D looks right. I especially don't think D looks right. And I think E is odd. It looks still like a mistake to me. I like it better than D because it doesn't confuse the mustaching thing. But
Like-
I still think it looks odd and like a mistake.
Like, I totally agree 100% with you that C looks like a typo with mustache. Like somebody forgot a character. But I think D or E are reasonable.
Yeah, I don't think that they're your. I don't think. Well, to me, I think clarity. Like, I think people will very quickly understand. I think people would very quickly understand what's there, and then you don't see it as a mistake. At least I don't. And the memory is what matters in the long run because you're using it. You know, you've got to write this like 4 or 5 times, and you don't want to check the docs 4 or 5 times to remember what's there. I can see how D and E are nice compromises, though. You get at least the direction. And it looks more joined with the equal operator and not surrounding plate name.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything you guys are saying. I think C is really bad, and I don't like D because, like I said, it confuses this idea of mustache, even though I think that's the most clear, and I think that really does nail home what you're talking about with memory, about the direction, the little arrow thing. At the same time, I still think it's going to be more confusing than good, because I think, kind of like Ilya said, if you do this 4 or 5 times, you're going to remember regardless of the little arrow or not. This is kind of going to help. Maybe. I don't even think it will, to be honest, but maybe it will.
I think you're right. I sense a lot of confusion for anything that is not symmetrical, because that's what everybody seems to be expecting.
That is exactly what I'm saying, articulated well.
Yeah. I don't think it's worth it. I really don't. I don't think having so many different types of syntaxes, like, I mean, first of all, I mean, you're suggesting G now, Adam.
I'm not suggesting it, but I do prefer it, I guess, to C and D and E.
G actually does have some directional hint in it, if you think about it as like a...
So not G, sorry. G does have a directional hint. I'm sorry, I meant H.
But what I was going to say with G is, if you think of it as math, it helps figure out which side is going to bind, instead of thinking about it as the shape of an arrow.
You think about it as what?
Like in a mathematical sense, like a set. Like inclusive, exclusive.
Oh. Yes. Yeah, I don't think of that enough to make that obvious to me. I would rather reverse it and have it more look like an arrow and directional. When this is child to parent and this is parent to child.
I think G is very well. It's consistent. So you have the event binding, you have non-dom binding, and you have the direction with round brackets and the other one. So I think you can remember it, and if you learn it, then you might, okay, round brackets is child to parent, and the other way. So
I would probably reverse this, though. I just don't think that that's how people are going to think.
Really? That's how I thought. Because it looks like an arrow. It's the direction that the information is flowing.
Doesn't this look like it's going from child to parent?
No, that looks like it's like the bracket is like the stop, and then plate name is like flowing to the right. So it's parent to child. Did you just flip those?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, yeah.
Looks like a bullet to me.
Yeah, it's a bullet from left to right. So it's the way the information is flowing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I said. That's why I just flipped them. This looks like child to parent to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No,
it looks
you're right.
parent to child, but I don't think it should be that way. Yeah, it looks very much like it's moving to the right, and this one looks like it's going to the left.
I agree. I'm sorry.
Now,
Don't break math.
And like I said, I don't want to throw in yet another one, but see, the thing I put in getter is just an example, but it doesn't matter. But why not just have one syntax for binding, and then some sort of modifier for one-way, and some sort of modifier for some sort of no modifier for two-way, some sort of modifier for parent to child, and another sort of modifier from child to parent, like, well, like I put in getter, just throw like the little hat that was there for that's one way to parent, and then
That's proposal A, pretty much, right?
yeah, this is what we have. Is that what you're?
Yeah, except for the instead of why does it have to be square brackets? Because it could still be curly brackets, right? Like it.
But I thought you didn't like curly brackets.
No, I like curly brackets as long as they're symmetrical. So that's what I'm saying is like like A, except with square brackets, and instead of the round parentheses, something else.
But then, wait, how do you separate one-way versus two-way?
Well, I mean, there's either two-way or one-way parent, one-way child, right? There's just three options, right?
There's three options, yes.
Right. So.
And also remember, though, $$ does count. So
right. But,
I didn't mention this, but hold on. One other thing to consider is that with all of these, if you want to set up two-way binding now, the proposal on an input element would be something like this. And if you wanted to set up one-way binding, you would, with this, you'd have to do something like that if we're going to stick with $.
Right.
So consider that when you guys are talking about throwing in syntaxes inside here.
And so, what's the difference between the $ value and just if it didn't have the $ there on the input there?
This means look on the view model. This means look on the element.
Okay, I think I don't think that's a problem then. So I think if A had curly brackets instead of square brackets, and instead of those parentheses in the third option had like a colon just for sake of argument, I think that would be better than this, because then you've got one way.
Hold on.
Brackets.
Can you write out what you're talking about?
It's in getter, if that helps. It's under the
There's a chat room here, right? Isn't there? Maybe just people put in that because I just have too many windows open. I guess fine, put it in getter because that's
whatever way works. I got it in both now.
Okay.
But just because I feel like it seems simple to me that there's three options, and I get that the direction thing is good. I don't think it's going to be as useful as you think it is, but I get that it's good. But I think simpler, where it's just like, here's binding syntax, and then here's modifiers. Because the regular one you're probably going to almost use is two-way, right, like you said. And then you can modify that to one-way from whatever to child.
You'd have the $ like that?
Yeah, and I don't think that's a problem, because that's sort of this thing that's very jQuery, like, this I'm referring to DOM now. And you could even put a space. You know what I mean? Like, you could put a space between the $ and the plate name and the colon and the plate name.
And what is this? I did your thing.
One way to child?
Yeah, that means nothing, that's my issues. I just look at it and I don't think that, right? So we can't use the...
Well, the logic makes sense, because he's doing the same thing we do on the right side. Like, what does the star mean? It's just a symbol for some meaning behind the scenes. It's arbitrary.
And I chose the colon arbitrarily just because it didn't seem to be used yet. It could be...
Well, I don't like that, because I want to use ampersand, which historically means reference scope. So means reference. So this is the reference scope. So there's a reason for that. It's not arbitrary. This is not arbitrary to me, because this means inverse. So to me, that makes sense that it's going to do the opposite of something else, right? I don't.
This to me.
If we can make, here's why it's so important to me. If we can make a visual representation of something that's going on, to me, that's clearly better than random syntax that people have to associate, right? Because people can associate these or this themselves, like, okay, I can learn that. But you guys, to me, it's weird that you're so hung up on the symmetry and don't value like the instinctual nature of these, which to me trumps like everything, right? That's why the first human languages were pictograms. Yes, you could argue that we evolved away from that, but they were, you draw a cat for the k sound kind of thing. Because people can learn that and remember that easier and don't have to go to school.
And though I agree with you, I think the curly brackets are too confusing, and they're the only ones that actually are good for that. Because the curly brackets are the only one that have that little point. You're still going to, when you're looking at option E, you're still going to be like, was that left to right or right to left? I don't remember. When you're looking at any of the other options, you're going to be like, was it a bullet going the left way or the right way? I don't think you're ever going to get that as good as this curly brackets with the little arrow pointing. And the curly brackets are confusing because that already means something in MustAction.
But then, what doesn't this already mean something? I don't understand why you were...
Right, that means like binding, right? Like in this sense, it means I'm binding.
Yeah, that's what it means here too. Or in here. Right? I mean...
I think Adam has a point, and why everybody is so confused, because instinctual as a developer, if you are writing code, you are expecting symmetry. When you open a bracket, you always
only if you're writing HTML.
Well, yes, which is what we're doing in this.
Yeah. But plenty of languages, JavaScript, you're not writing symmetrical JavaScript. It's HTML you write.
Well, but especially with curly braces.
Let me digress. I absolutely agree. Adam has a point. There's no denying that. It's what you value more. And I come down on valuing, like, looking at it and just immediately knowing what it's doing over the symmetry. And then some other people might value the symmetry.
Well, it's not that those are not the only. Remember, we did the plus and minuses. That those are not the only two plus and minuses for the two ways.
For option D, wouldn't it just be an issue of like you present it as, hey, these are operators that we use. These are data binding operators that we use. I know that we know that the real operator is equal sign, but if we just say this is an operator, like wouldn't that be enough to like get over this means something special into this other thing called MustAction?
I think that's what Justin's saying, right? That's what he's saying, is that this operator idea would get over that. I don't know if it would. It still looks like a mistake to me, even in option D. That's just my opinion.
Justin Love asked, is there a good summary of the cases that need to be covered and the syntactic limitations which we have to operate under? Really, the syntactic, well, you can look at what the DOM wants as terms of attribute names. So we're kind of under that limitation, even though we can kind of get around it. But we definitely can't use these kind of things. And we need this, we really need to do the syntax on we need some syntax, and it has to be on the left-hand side. Because we can't have just plate name and do it on the right-hand side like we used to. This is, I can just take it, there's a lot of reasons for this, they're hard to explain, but the syntax has to be on the left-hand side. You can't use these characters. And the cases are really one-way binding, two-way binding. The cases are actually all in the issue. They're actually all in the issue. They're all here, the cases, talking about, it's really event binding, one-way binding, two-way binding, from parent to child, child to parent, and also with element properties. So, anyways, we've been here an hour and 20 minutes. I really appreciate everybody's thing, but just to kind of move on, what I'd ask everybody to do is just type up your favorite, what you really like. Give your top 1 and 2 favorite choices, I'll just go through them again. Try to be blind to what everybody else is doing. Think of yours. Nobody write theirs yet. Think of your top 1 and 2, and then we'll all write them at the same time.
Could you make your text a little bit smaller so we can see more of them?
I'm just gonna paste this whole thing in Gitter. And
why do we need to separate DOM events from like custom events?
because we need to know whether to bind on the element or bind on the view model. And I don't want to bind both just for performance, big part for performance reasons.
But don't we know, like uphand, that that's a DOM event?
We could, but I mean, DOM events are added all the time. This is a big part of can control. If you've ever used can control and have to like add a space before it's a custom event, then you know that hard coding in DOM events is not a good idea. I've learned that mistake at least, and I'm not gonna repeat that mistake. All right, so just to recap, A is kind of like the angular way, but uses a reverse, and there's uses kind of that caret to reverse the binding. A star basically is like, instead of having two-way binding, this kind of sexy angular way, we'll just do it still the brackets. A1 is kind of like that, but with just brackets for everything. B and C are basically the same thing, just with index brackets versus curly brackets. D and E do that, but they put it as like an operator. F, that was just like we could use parentheses with all that previous stuff, but we'd have to come up with event binding syntax. G is the bullet syntax, we could call it that. H is then like, I don't remember, I think it's one-way binding, then event binding, and two-way binding, and then is that parent to child? No, that's event binding at the end. So it's one way, and I'm not doing this by the way. I'm not doing this to prove my point. I'm really not. The first one is what it was. It was parent to child. The second way is child to parent. Then it's two-way binding. Then it's event binding on the view model. Then it's event binding on the element. All right. Cast your votes.
Where are we casting them?
We get 2 votes.
Oh, I do? I haven't scrolled down yet, I guess. I don't have any. In the Gitter room?
Saying everyone vote on 2 things.
I meant say put A and then put 2 letters. Your first one and then your second one.
Ah, you can't put a star in Gitter.
You can escape it. You should be able to.
You did that on purpose. But you have to escape it.
Put them, and I'll think about all of this, maybe ask some people who aren't as familiar with can.js, and kind of come to a decision. Cool. Thanks, everybody, for participating. I really appreciate your insights and your feedback. And I have to go to the bathroom so bad, so I'm going to end it.
This is fun.
All right, later.
See ya.